And in the beginning of it all, a boy wakes up in a place sunk down, until suddenly a girl approaches him, saying she is happy that he is up, and then addresses him as her king. And as for the boy, he gives a little more context about what is happening, and says that the game he played in his bed when he was sick was a strategy game set in a dark fantasy world. And the character he loved most in the entire game was precisely the woman who is in front of him. As for her, the girl talks to him again, but this time, she calls him Takuto, his real name, and congratulates him for having achieved the feat of beating the nightmare difficulty using the most difficult civilization to deal with, in this case, Minnow. So, this makes Takuto the #1 player in that game. Having said that, the girl starts to get emotional, because she remembers all the times Takuto arrived there and went to the game next to her. Upon hearing this, he says that he used to use her in the game, because he wanted to be as strong as her, so he says he is happy to have the opportunity to talk to her. And as for the girl, she says the same to him. After all, she is also happy to have the chance to talk to Takuto. And suddenly, Takuto looks at that cloudy sky and deduces that she must have summoned him there. However, the girl says that it is not true. She simply walked until she ended up there by chance, and even though she had been there for a short time, she describes that place as being something antagonistic to paradise. In this case, she believes that the place is similar to the world of eternal nations. And although the subject gives a lot of room for conversation, the girl ignores it and just says that she is happy to meet Takuto in person. So she takes his hands and asks them to follow that game once more. And even though she doesn't know exactly where they are for her, the important thing is that they will start this journey together, and soon they will be able to build a kingdom just for the two of them. And as for Takuto, he still doesn't understand exactly what is happening there, but at the same time, he says he is willing to recreate the brilliant days he had in that world alongside his traveling companion. Upon hearing this, the girl introduces herself as Atu Muddy, a child born from the mud who will destroy the world in the future. Furthermore, Atu makes it clear that from that day on, her body and mind belong to Takuto, who must command her in the worst possible way, with the sole purpose of doing harm to anything around them. Upon hearing this, Takuto plays along with her and says that his goal is also to create the most feared and evil nation of all. And to start, Takuto produces a monster called the Beater, and then he explains that the goal of Minnow, his kingdom, is to be an educated civilization that rules over evil and ruin, so they must keep these things in mind whenever they act. At this, Atu compliments his words, saying that they must avoid as much as possible that other people discover their plan. And as for Takuto, he says that the ideal is for them to gather as much information as possible without anyone discovering them. With that said, he addresses the scout monster and says that he will give him an order as his king. In this case, he asks the monster to go check the area around them. At this point, Atu acts even more incisively than Takuto, telling the monster to go quickly and not disappoint his king with an incomplete mission. Upon hearing this, the creature runs away immediately, and upon seeing that the monster obeyed her, Atu feels more relieved. At this, Takuto decides one of the features already in the game. In this case, it shares the monster's vision with itself, and notice that this very useful function actually works. But seeing that they have spent a lot of MP, Atu suggests that they save the emergency production. After all, they usually spend more. Hearing this, Takuto says that he was thinking of producing a warrior who could fight for them, but since their mana is very low, he decides to leave that plan for later. And seeing him worried about this, Atu assures him that he will face any enemy that comes to attack them, so she tells him to stay calm. And although she says this, Atu remembers that she is still very weak. At this, Takuto notices that she is at level 3 in strength, which means that she is completely vulnerable, and any enemy attack could cost both of their lives, preventing them from continuing with their plan to build the Minnow Kingdom. Having said all this, Takuto begins to feel hopeless. And after a while, Takuto manages to check the entire area around them through the monster he had set to explore the area, and although the place is all forest, he was unable to find any other animals or monsters there. Upon hearing this, Atu says that this forested area seems to be the best place for them to hide, due to its safety. However, Takuto says that the place also has no food, something that they need to get as soon as possible. At this, Atu feels useless for not being able to do anything to help yet, and apologizes for that. But Takuto says that just her presence is already something that makes him very happy, so she doesn't need to worry about anything else. And as soon as she receives such direct praise, Atu's eyes shine, and says that she is moved by what she heard. And at another moment, Takuto continues exploring the forest with the help of the monster, until suddenly, he finds a community of dark elves, which by the way, is not that far from where they are. Upon hearing this, Atu feels more relieved, as dark elves tend to be more neutral. And as for Takuto, he remains worried, because if they really are in the world of the eternal nations, and there is another civilization nearby, they could end up getting into a local war, something they are certainly not ready to face. Furthermore, being neighbors of another civilization is something that puts their initial plan of doing everything under the table in doubt. At this, Atu suggests that they escape from there together. But first, Takuto decides to gather a little more information about the dark elves and the forest environment before leaving. But suddenly, they are approached by a group group of dark elves. At this, the lead elf remembers moments before this encounter when they were walking through the forest in search of food. And during the walk, an elf named Emil tells him about Idoagia, a kingdom that guards a cursed forest. It is said that there is something evil sealed in these lands, which aims to undermine the flourishing of life in the kingdom. And after hearing this, the leader of the elves says that this story is nothing more than superstition and tells everyone to continue living confidently in that forest so that they can honor their ancestors who lived there in the past. And well, returning to the present, the leader of the elves interprets it too, and Takuto as evil people who are there to end them. At this, the leader and the other elves kneel in towards them, and then the leader introduces himself as Gia Nagiv, a dark elf of the Mazarim clan. With that, he apologizes to Takuto and Atu for invading their area. At this, Atu tries to intimidate them with a serious tone in his voice and asks what they are doing there. And then, Gia explains that he and his people were expelled from the lands they lived before and ended up being sent to that completely abandoned place with no food. And in his view, his people ended up suffering for something they didn't even deserve, and in the end, they just want a place to live in peace. And upon hearing the whole story of the Dark Elves, Takuto sympathizes with them and throws several apples in the direction of the elves, saying that they can keep them all. And upon picking up one of the apples, Gia is confused, as he is not used to this type of fruit in his forest. And although he has not eaten for days, Gia questions whether he should really stop there to eat while his people wait for him. And meanwhile, the other elves begin to eat the apples, and are amazed by the delicious taste of this fruit that they have never seen before. In addition to the apples, Takuto throws some pears in their direction, leaving Gia even more surprised by such generosity. At this, Atu notices the elf without reacting, and explains that her king is offering his charity to the elven people. And upon hearing this, Gia tells Takuto that their children are almost dying of hunger, so he asks him to give the fruit to the elf's children instead of giving it to him. And upon seeing that the elf's situation is even worse than he imagined, Takuto drops even more food for them. And in the meantime, Gia remembers the story of the Dark Elves, who were despised as beings who fled from the light, thus they are pushed even further into darkness. And when they see that there is still someone willing to lend a hand to them, the elves deduce that they are the target of a true divine miracle. And as for Gia, he asks Takuto who exactly he is, but receives no answer. And when returning to the other elves, Gia informs everyone that they have returned with food for everyone. However, he does not say exactly the source where so much food came from. And at another moment, Molter goes to Gia and says that the fruits he brought are truly incredible. As for Gia, he says he had never seen such a fruit before. But when he sees the different way he expresses himself, Molter immediately realizes that something is wrong and then asks what really happened. At this point, Gia decides to open up to him and reveals that he found a mysterious being deep in the forest. Upon hearing this, Molter deduces that he has interacted with the King of Ruin, who, as his name suggests, seeks to destroy the world, reducing everything to ruins. And although the mysterious being did not give a name, Gia says he was terrifying and Otto justify this name. And besides, the king had a servant who explained to the elves exactly what her king wanted. And upon hearing this, Molter changes his mind and says that probably the being he saw in the depths of the forest is not the King of Ruin. In this, he asks if the king charged anything in exchange for the food, and Gia says no. Hearing this, Molter becomes even more confused, as he cannot imagine any evil being capable of doing charity without asking for anything in return. As for Gia, he calls this being your grace, a respectful term. At this, Molter irritates them and begins to charge him for showing respect to a dangerous being who is possibly the King of Ruin. But still, Gia says that even though this creature is evil, it filled the stomachs of the entire tribe. Upon hearing this, Molter apologizes to them and says that Gia did the right thing by accepting the king's food. Meanwhile, Atu scolds Takuto, saying that he wasted their mana on something completely unnecessary. Seeing that she was angry about it, Takuto apologizes and says that he needs her by his side. At this, Atu smiles from ear to ear and apologizes for being rude to him. As for Takuto, he remembers that he ended up interacting badly with the Dark Elves, and when trying to find some reasons why, he starts to cry when he realizes that he is not really, he is just a strange guy. And during the conversation, Molter asks if Jai ready to return to the king, and he responds yes. Molter then points out that they have already accepted the King of Ruin's charity, so he assumes the king will demand something from them later. However, Jai reminds him that the king hadn't mentioned anything of the sort, which leads him to believe this charity was given from the heart, without expecting anything in return. But seeing Jai being so naive, Molter says they can't say the king won't demand something later, because when an evil being offers help, he always demands something. But even if this is true, Molter remembers that they truly need the king's help to survive. As for Jai, he says that their lives would be very difficult if they left the forest and started wandering around. After all, they're not sure they'd have food outside their homes. However, he remembers that by leaving the forest and wandering around, they might eventually reach the Dark Continent, a place where they won't be pursued. Hearing this, Molter says that this is their last chance to stay alive, so he suggests they leave the forest and continue their journey. Meanwhile, Takuto's monster interrupts his conversation with Atu, and she begins to scold the creature. However, Takuto claims he was the one who summoned the monster. Analyzing the information the monster brought, Takuto Takuto discovers that the Dark Elves are heading his way, likely to collect the remaining food. Upon discovering this, Takuto worries that he's having too much contact with beings from different cultures, as this could eventually lead to conflict between the races. Hearing this, Atu notices he's very worried and asks if something's bothering him. To this, Takuto says that because he's terrible at communicating immediately, he believes he won't be able to negotiate with the Dark Elves. Seeing him feeling insecure about this, Atu decides to take the lead in the negotiations in his place, and what's more, she's also willing to display all his generosity as king. And although Takuto thanks her for taking the initiative to help him, he asks if she's really sure she wants to do this. As for her, Atu interprets his question as Takuto belittling her, thinking she wouldn't be capable of handling such matters. At this, Takuto contradicts her, saying he completely believes her, so he assigns her the negotiation duties. And well, a few minutes later, the Dark Elves finally arrive at the scene. Molter is the first to address the King of the Ruins, thanking him for the opportunity to meet. Upon hearing this, Atu congratulates him for at least showing respect to his king, but then cuts him off, telling Molter to hurry up and tell him what he's doing there. He thanks Takuto for the food he and his people have provided, and then asks for the honor of at least knowing the name of the King of the Ruins. As for Takuto, he allows them to know his name, and Atu then tells him his name and introduces him as the Lord of the Apocalypse and the ruler of the ruins. As for her, Atu claims to be of lower status than Takuto, whom she calls a god. Therefore, she asks the elves not to confuse her by calling her a god as well. Upon hearing this, Molter assures her that he won't make that mistake and will forever engrave their names in his mind. Hearing this, Takuto feels relieved, noting that the Dark Elves have been acting sympathetically so far. And well, Atu decides to end the negotiation, ordering them to take the rest of the food and leave quickly to prevent it from spoiling. But before leaving, Molter asks what can they do to repay the King of Ruins for all his charity. Upon hearing them say this, Atu makes it clear that rewarding Takuto is practically unnecessary, especially since she's certain they've never managed to prepare an offering good enough to satisfy her king. Furthermore, Atu begins to suspect the elves and asks if they're planning something shady, to which Molter affirms that they aren't. As for Takuto, he senses the conversation going downhill right now, all thanks to Atao's hostility. He then takes her aside to talk and convinces her to act more benevolently during negotiations, as he senses the elves are genuinely trying to build a mutually beneficial relationship with them. That is, they don't just want to receive charity, but rather to return that help in some way. At this, Atu understands Takuto's point of view and tells the elves that the king is willing to accept their offer in exchange for their charity. Upon hearing this, Molter seems more relaxed. As for Takuto, he finally understands what was happening there. Molter was simply suspicious of him, thinking Takuto was playing a prank on them. Seeing that they saw Takuto this way, Atu becomes angry with them. However, Molter tries to explain himself, saying that he never saw Takuto as evil. As they discuss this, Atu returns to the topic of the meeting and thinks of some reward they could give Takuto. Atu then asks them to tell the king about the world beyond the forest, and that they will have to leave the forest once they have made a pact with the King of the Ruins. Upon hearing this, Gis, unlike Molter, clearly shows surprise in his eyes. He begins to argue with Takuto about it, but Molter rebukes him, saying that if this is the king's will, they should simply comply. Afterward, Molter thanks Takuto for the opportunity to meet with him, then turns his back to leave. At the end of the negotiation, Takuto wonders if he should really expel them from the forest, since there's a good chance the elves will collapse elsewhere. After thinking a little more about how to resolve the situation, Takuto decides to call the Dark Elves back and proposes that they become his citizens. Upon hearing this, Atu approaches him and asks what exactly he's thinking. Takuto explains that he will use the refugee system, as the Dark Elves are not inherently good or evil. Therefore, he believes that if they are accepted into his civilization as refugees, they will become evil beings like him. And although the coexistence between two races linked to evil exists, Atu says that the Dark Elves are a very different race from the citizens of Mynoghra, the homunculi, and therefore, Atu believes there is still a chance of them coming into conflict. Upon hearing this, Takuto reminds her that the homunculi's appearance is already not very striking to human eyes, so having the Dark Elves on their side is not something that should worry them as much. Well, upon hearing this, Atu addresses the Dark Elves again, informing them that the King of the Ruins intends to found a nation soon, and if the elves decide to become citizens of this kingdom, Takuto promises to protect them. Upon hearing this, Molter asks what would happen to them if they became citizens of Mynoghra, and Atu then tells them that they would simply become evil beings, just like Takuto and her. And while this information may sound shocking at first, Atu makes it clear that they will have legitimate to choose which path they will follow. However, she suggests that they come to her side, as it is without a doubt the most fun. And well, at another point, Atu talks to Takuto as they walk through the forest, and seems to still be thinking about why the Dark Elves took so long to decide to become citizens of Mynoghra. And as for Takuto, he reminds her that it was a truly difficult decision to make, considering that they would become evil beings once they join their side. And as they walk a little further, they finally reach the elves' camp, and are welcomed as true kings. At this, Atu checks that all the Dark Elves are present, present, and then reveals that they have all been accepted as citizens of the Mynoghra nation. With that, she turns to Takuto and asks again if he is sure he wants to do this, and just as before, he remains firm in his idea, saying that all the conditions for this have been met, and so they are ready to formally announce the founding of Mynoghra. And once everyone becomes citizens of Mynoghra, Atu tells the Dark Elves that they can count on the protection of Takuto, their god and ruler. As for Ja, he finds it strange that her appearance hasn't changed even after becoming a citizen of the god of ruins, as he thought they would become evil beings both inside and out. But soon after, Ja begins to feel a great hatred welling up deep within her. However, all the elves begin to venerate Takuto, but this time, they venerate him with a sense of truth in their hearts. And well, a few days later, Takuto becomes concerned to discover that other great nations already exist on that continent. After all, if the neighboring kingdoms discover the existence of Mynoghra, an evil kingdom that lives alongside them, the nations will surely come into conflict with them. And since the Mynoghra kingdom has only just been founded, Takuto realizes that it does not yet have enough military strength to oppose these two great nations. Suddenly, Molter appears before Takuto, accompanied by Emla and Ja. Atu takes advantage of the fact that everyone is gathered and explains each person's role in the kingdom, stating that Ja will be the commander of Mynoghra's forces. Upon hearing this, Ja becomes excited and promises to impale any enemy ordered to do so. As for Molter, he asserts his intelligence, saying he will deliver even more results than Ja. As for Emla, she also promises to help the kingdom with her hard work, seeing their willingness to work hard. Atu asks if Molter could gather timber while keeping the forest intact, and Molter replies that he could. After all, he had always kept the forest where he lived standing. Hearing this, Ja is confused, because since Takuto is an evil being, he believed the order would be the complete opposite, destroying the forest. But besides asking them not to destroy the place, Takuto asks them to further reforest the area. But upon hearing the term reforestation, everyone's speechless. Takuto realizes that their magical technology is far inferior to what he expected. As for Atu, she explains the term reforestation to them. In this case, it means planting trees in the ground, which in turn accelerates their growth throughout the forest. With that said, Atu attributes this knowledge to Takuto, who soon feels overwhelmed by the pressure, especially since she's lying about his infinite wisdom. As for Emla, she remembers the king's apples and asks if he designed this new fruit, to which Atu replies yes. Upon hearing this, Takuto realizes that he can use his emergency production ability to create many different things, such as gunpowder, base metals, and even oil. And as they walk with the saint, Anion of the soldiers comments on the possible special power she possesses. But upon closer inspection, the soldier deduces that this is nothing more than a legend, and that in fact, the saint is merely a symbol and nothing more. Upon hearing this, another soldier responds to his colleague, saying that he will soon discover the saint's true power. Suddenly, a group of goblins appears and threatens to attack them. Upon seeing this, the saint informs the monsters that they have already lost the chance to repent for disturbing the peace of the sacred realm of Qualia and for abandoning the holy god Arlos. And so she punishes them with death. Upon seeing Soalina's absurd power, the soldier who had doubted her strength is left open-mouthed, questioning what he's just seen. One of the men informs him that the saint's power is responsible for enabling coexistence between humans and elves, as well as warding off evil from the kingdom when necessary. Furthermore, the man informs him that Soalina is one of the 7 great savior saints of the Idaragi continent, but is better known as Saint Soalina of the Flowery Burials, because upon killing her enemies, she transforms them into beautiful flowers that make the combat environment a more beautiful and peaceful place. As for Soalina, she asked the cardinal about the matter she had discussed with him earlier, the possible apocalypse that will occur in the cursed lands, which in turn would force them to send paladins to investigate the place. But upon hearing this, the cardinal says he cannot comply with her request. After all, showing interest in the cursed lands south of the Dark Continent is completely absurd. Therefore, the headquarters would never give permission for the paladins to go there. And upon seeing this impediment from the headquarters, Soalina says she will go there herself. However, as soon as he hears her idea, the cardinal reminds her that Soalina is no longer the simple village girl she used to be, so she must step into her saintly shoes. But as soon as he says this, he's surprised by Soalina's blank look, and so he decides to obey her, sending whatever efforts he can to the site, even against his own will. Meanwhile, Atu excites the Dark Elves, saying they will begin construction in that area. Well, within minutes, the Dark Elves construct Takuto's room and throne. And while this is already surprising, Atu makes it clear that their ultimate goal is to build the kingdom that will shake the heavens and dominate the earth. Well, after all the kingdom's administrators have gone to Takuto's office, Atu says they can begin the meeting. But first, Emily hands over the king's new clothes and makes it clear that both she and the other elves worked hard to ensure he could dress like a true king. With that done, they prepare to begin the meeting, and Atu decides to begin by discussing internal politics. Upon hearing this, Molter asks which buildings they should build first, and Atu says they should prioritize creating a food production facility. After all, if they ever get into a war, they must have a large arsenal of food at their disposal. Hearing this, Molter remembers Takuto's power and asks if he could produce infinite food for them. If he can do that, building something to provide them with food will be completely unnecessary and will only waste their energy. Hearing this, Atu says they must give the king time to rest, so they need to build their own food source. Furthermore, she reminds him that with the kingdom's expansion, distributing food will become unfeasible for all inhabitants, even though the king is able to produce a lot of food. After her explanation, Molter realizes he just asked a stupid question without even thinking and apologizes. As for Atu, she places a mysterious tree on the table. Molter and the others are left wondering what it is. However, Atu says it's just a meat tree. Although she spells out what's in front of them, Molter and the others remain incredulous. Atu then decides to explain in more detail what the plan is, saying it's one of his civilization's food production facilities and produces a mysterious meat that tastes like human flesh. Upon better understanding what it's all about, Molter finds the concept of the flesh tree strange and says that some people will likely have negative feelings about eating human flesh. However, Atu says that this is just one of the foods the kingdom will have, so anyone who doesn't like human flesh can just eat anything else. Moving on to the next topic of the meeting, Atu says they urgently need to acquire cutting-edge technologies, considering they're a kingdom in its infancy. Upon hearing this, Molter asked what kind of technology they should prioritize. At this, Atu says they should start with magical technology first, more precisely military magic. After all, conventional magic is only good for attacking a few dozen people at most, while military magic can be used to attack an entire army of thousands of soldiers, and even alter the terrain to their benefit. Hearing this, Molter is impressed that such powerful magic exists. However, Atu makes it clear that to make this possible, they need to select some very talented people. Upon hearing this, she becomes excited and says she will organize an army to help them. However, Takuto suggests they don't waste their efforts on that for now. After all, an army produces nothing and on top of that, consumes resources and mana. And while understanding the king's point, she says the kingdom's current group of warriors still doesn't have enough strength to protect Takuto. Furthermore, Molter says that because he and Ja are the leaders of the Dark Elves, they have a bounty on their heads. Seeing that they are worried about their pursuers, Takuto decides to help them by creating a hero to protect them. However, upon hearing about this hero, Ja asks what they are talking about. In this, Atu explains that in Mynoghra, there are several heroes who serve the king and protect him with their unique powers. But to summon them, they must meet several very specific conditions. As for Takuto, he explains that having a hero is much more beneficial for keeping their kingdom hidden. After all, having a giant army would attract more attention than having just one hero. Regarding the citizens' mana management, Takuto explains that the happier the people of the kingdom are, the more mana they release. Therefore, Takuto promises to do his best to ensure that all his people reach the pinnacle of happiness. Meanwhile, a young man named Lonius goes to the temple to pay his respects to God when he is suddenly interrupted by Vertil, who rushes up to him to hurry him along. Lonius tells him to stop shouting and show more respect when stepping onto a sacred site. However, Vertil doesn't care about Lonius's faith and says the boy has already prayed enough, so they should hurry and get back to their mission. But first, he asks again what the names of Lonius's wife and daughter are, as he has forgotten. Upon hearing this question, completely disconnected from the mission, the young man refuses to answer it. However, when proceed a little further on, Vertil says his wife's name is Marcia and his daughter's name is Minna. With that, he continues on his way, remembering that Vertil is indeed the rude and ill-mannered man he'd heard rumors about. However, Lonius doesn't dismiss Vertil's incredible abilities. During the walk, Vertil wonders why they're going to the Dark Continent. Lonius reminds him that they're going there to investigate the revelations Saint Solina received, and if they succeed in this mission, they will be well regarded by the Congress of the Southern Provinces, which is a huge advantage for Lonius. But at the same time, if they fail, Lonius will be labeled an inferior paladin, completely discredited. Meanwhile, Vertil complains about the fact that they have a poorly equipped unit for such an important mission. After all, only he and Lonius are paladins in the entire team. As for Lonius, he believes that those responsible for all this must have had a reason for pairing him with Vertil just before his departure. Although he doesn't fully understand what's happening, Lonius believes that having Vertil on his team will be beneficial, as it will increase the entire team's chances of survival. Meanwhile, Takuto and Atu observe the elves work and are amazed at how quickly they build the houses. Furthermore, Takuto feels that the Dark Elves now seem much more full of life and eager to progress, unlike when he first met them. As for Emla, she's still worried and asks if he likes the elves' work. Takuto responds positively, saying their work is incredible. Therefore, he makes it clear that he made the right choice in accepting the Dark Elves as citizens. Upon hearing this, Emla becomes emotional and begins to cry, but soon recovers and apologizes for her lack of composure. She then begins to inspect the king for the civilization the elves created, explaining that all of this was only possible because Takuto provided them with the best possible agricultural tools. Continuing the inspection, Emla takes him to the water source they discovered nearby. Once there, they are approached by Ja and Molter. Guy explains that he was there hoping to build an aqueduct, but after discovering that the water there isn't very good, he decided to abandon the idea. However, upon hearing this, Atu scoops up the water and the baby in front of everyone, leaving them astonished. Then she asks them to take a deep breath. As they do so, Molter and Ja feel their minds sharpen, as if reinvigorated. Atu explains that the cursed lands offer benefits to evil beings, so they won't be harmed by drinking the water. But while this is a good thing, Atu reminds them that the place attracts a lot of attention, and this could clearly attract enemies to the kingdom. Ja then returns with the idea of creating an army, but Atu reminds him that Takuto has already promised to create a hero. Upon hearing this, Molter says, I still haven't fully grasped the concept of a hero. Atu reveals herself to be a hero, saying that heroes like her possess enough strength to wipe out an entire army. Furthermore, heroes grow stronger over time. Upon hearing this, Molter is impressed and tells them they should hurry to build a palace for the king, as he can't fathom Takuto living in a house similar to that of his servants. Seeing that he's not giving up on this idea, Takuto allows them to build a palace and requests that it be a floating castle. Meanwhile, Lonius and his team make their way to the Dark Continent, engaging in small, basic battles against Goblin. Lonius, still unsure of what awaits him, asks that the mission proceed smoothly once they reach the Dark Continent. Still during the trip, Vertil says he is surprised by the amount of mercenaries they managed to get for the mission. In this, Loni assists same for him. After all, he just got very lucky, as most of the mercenaries are currently in the north due to the event called the Northern Disturbance. In this case, the barbarians appeared in the place suddenly, more precisely in the sacrificed kingdom of Quilita in the northern province, and then they invaded the villages, causing enormous damage to the place. Thus, the Saint and the army were sent to keep things under control, but the disturbance still doesn't seem to be anywhere near calming down. Even hearing all this, Bargo dismisses it. Lonius tells him to keep quiet, as if it doesn't affect him. However, Bargo reaffirms that this isn't really their problem. Vertil comments on the excellent pay being offered to anyone who goes to the site to help fight the barbarians. Although the pay is indeed high, Bargo says that after they learn there's a witch there, no one wants to go there anymore, knowing they'll get the worst of it, and in the end, lose their reward in their lives. Upon hearing this, Vertil also turns his back on the northern problems, saying they shouldn't really care about it. After all, they're heading to the cursed lands of the south, so they should just leave it at that, as they don't know what they might find there. And well, when they take a break from their journey, Lonius becomes interested in learning more about this witch Bargo had mentioned, and asks him to tell him more. However, Bargo dismisses the matter, saying it's just a baseless rumor. In fact, the rumors say the commotion in the north was caused by a witch. Upon hearing this, Lonius asserts that something like that could never be true. After all, one person alone could never cause such a commotion that the saint needed to be dispatched. As for Vertil, he completely ignores the matter at hand and begins drinking excessively. Bargo tries to talk sense into them, telling them he's drinking too much. However, Vertil reminds him that after they've fulfilled their duty to save the people, they should feel free to relax a bit. After all, that's what God commands them to do. Upon hearing this, Lonius says he misinterpreted God's word, telling them to go enjoy themselves with their families after work, not go out drinking in bars. However, Vertil continues to defend his interpretation, saying that Lonius simply understood God's word differently than he did, but that both interpretations are correct. As for Bargo, he simply laughs off the religious clash between the two, then returns to the subject of the cursed lands of the Black Continent, wondering what might be happening there. And then, he deduces that there may be some rumor about a witch in the cursed lands, similar to what's happening in the northern district. But upon hearing this, Vertil makes it clear that this isn't the case. After all, they already have an idea of what the problem in the cursed lands might be. In this case, they know that the Dark Elves have fled to the area. Therefore, Vertil believes that the leaders are simply worried that the Dark Elves won't cause a disturbance there, and nothing more. Hearing this, Bargo feels relieved, but at the same time, he understands the leader's concern, as this is a matter that cannot be ignored, even because Dark Elves are excellent at curses and murders. As for Lonius, he explains that as they grow stronger in secret, the Dark Elves will surely come after them and attack them. Seeing that Lonius is a little tense, Vertil tells him he doesn't need to worry so much. After all, they're only going to the location to investigate, so if there's any trouble there, they can simply flee, as they're not being paid to hunt any Dark Elves. And while he's right on a practical level, Lonius condemns Vertil's plan on a moral level, as God would never be proud if he saw his vanguard cowering in the face of danger. And for Lonius, God probably expects them to give their lives to exterminate evil. Upon hearing this, Vertil tells Lonius not to be so hungry for glory. After all, even they, the paladins, sometimes have to take this less dignified attitude. After all, everyone there is a family that depends on them, and so they can't just die for nothing. With that said, Vertil tells everyone to just raise their glasses and drink until dawn. Meanwhile, Takuto gathers all the Dark Elves and creates a monster from the fruit of the flesh tree. Upon seeing that their king is able to create new life with his magic, all the elves are amazed by such skill. But Atsu makes it clear that his powers go beyond that, so so they must devote even more of their faith to the king, so that he can provide more valuable things for the people. At another point, Takuto comments to Atu that he will summon a hero in his next ritual, because with 2 heroes at his side, they can be sure they will have the fighting strength necessary to deal with any invader. And in this case, he intends to first summon the Queen of Insects, a creature that is capable of giving more strength to insects and creating them in mass, creating a true army of powerful insects. And besides having all these attributes, Takuto remembers that Ila is the only hero who has no evil intentions, unlike the other heroes who want to wipe out all of humanity. Therefore, Takuto believes that Ila is their only option as a hero. At the same time, Takuto makes it clear that he intends to meet these other heroes, so he hopes they don't cause too much trouble when they come to that world. Meanwhile, Lonius and the others face a hill giant as they approach the cursed lands. Seeing that they're still being attacked during the day, Lonius feels he should get used to it, as the Dark Continent will certainly have more dangerous creatures of this kind. Lonius orders Bargo to use his bow against the monster, but Vertil interrupts them, saying he'll fight the creature in their place. After all, they don't have time to waste in a place like that. With that, Vertil summons a sacred sword art to make his own sword even more powerful and gain divine power. As for the giant, he tries to attack Vertil, but to no avail. Meanwhile, Lonius explains to the others that paladins who receive divine power end up having their physical abilities enhanced. Furthermore, the power to eradicate evil fills their bodies, and for a superior paladin, this power is even greater, comparable to that of a lesser dragon. Thus, a hill giant won't stand a chance against Vertil in this form. And well, after a few brief attacks, Vertil finally defeats the creature, leaving all his companions impressed by his strength. Lonius then pays him homage and says that with such power, they can certainly complete the mission without much trouble. But even hearing Lonius's confident words, Vertil says he's still not certain of victory, as they may encounter various dangers along the way. Meanwhile, Atu sees Takuto eating a snack, and she suggests he eats something healthier. However, Takuto says he's tired of chasing that, so he prefers to stick to snacks. Instead of worrying about himself, Takuto says he's more concerned about her. After all, Atu always eats only salad, something he doesn't consider very normal. However, Atu says it suits her taste better. Leaving that aside, Takuto asks Atu to call Molter and the others when they're done eating. She then agrees to do so, but asks him to elaborate on the meeting's topic. Takuto explains that thanks to Long Legs, he now knows the forest surroundings well, so he intends to consult him to better understand how to handle it if the neighboring town approaches them. After all, they are the people most likely to discover the existence of the Mynoghra kingdom. And while this may worry them a bit, Takuto asks Atu not to worry too much about it. After all, there's no sign of anyone discovering his existence. As for Atu, she still advises him not to let his guard down, as the possibility of being surprised at any moment still exists. During the conversation, Takuto's expression changes abruptly, and he says he's just sensed the presence of strange people in the kingdom, and to make matters worse, it's an armed group. He asks Atu to go to the men and ask them to leave peacefully, but if that doesn't work, she has permission to attack them. Meanwhile, Lonius and the other paladins approach the forest until suddenly, they notice a young girl approaching. Vertil immediately approaches her and asks her to introduce herself. Furthermore, he tells her to tell him what she is doing in the cursed lands. In order not to raise any suspicion, Atu says that she is just a dark elf who fled to that forest with the sole intention of surviving. That said, she asks the paladins why they've come here. However, Vertil says he can't reveal their objectives, so he orders her to answer their question first. They want to know what she's doing in that forest. To this, Atu replies that she's simply living alongside her brothers, who, like her, are also seeking survival. Upon hearing this, Vertil says they'll go into the forest for a bit, as they need to investigate. To this, Atu asks them not to. After all, her brothers are still terrified by the situation they find themselves in. After explaining his reasons for not wanting them present, Atu asks what they want in such a deserted and dark forest. Vertil tells him the paladins have received a divine revelation, stating the forest is in grave danger due to a calamity lurking in the area. Upon seeing him reveal this national secret, Lonius rebukes him, saying that even as a superior paladin, there is a limit to his authority and how much he can say. Although Vertil has made this revelation to her, Atu still asks them not to enter the forest. After exchanging a few more words with the girl, Vertil decides to do as she asks, telling her companions they should simply leave. However, Lonius objects to Vertil's attitude, saying that from now on he will take command of the mission, so they must enter the cursed lands and continue the investigation. Upon hearing this, Bargo and the others decide to stay with Lonius. After all, he is their employer, unlike Vertil, who is merely a collaborator. Seeing that they intend to go against his request, Atu realizes he will have to resolve things the hard way. And upon noticing that the girl is a witch, Vertil asks her toad messenger returns to the kingdom and tells them what they've just discovered. However, Bargo says the witch's latest attack has killed their messenger. As for Atu, she claims to be the monster they've been searching for all along, so she tells them to stop stalling and attack immediately. However, Lonius stares at her with wide eyes, showing no inclination to face her. At this, Vertil tells Lonius that they must fight, even though he knows the enemy will be a great challenge. And when attacked by the men, Atu remains unharmed and mocks Lonius's army, saying that at least they aren't showing her mercy, even though they can't harm her. At this, Vertil begins to lament, saying that things almost went according to plan. Hearing this, Atu says the same. After all, she almost managed to stop them from entering the forest. But everything went downhill when Lonius tried to play the hero and decided to confront her. As for him, Lonius still doesn't quite understand what's going on there and asked what a witch is. Vertil then explains that he was ordered by his superiors not to say much about the matter. However, he realizes that the situation has reached a point where it no longer makes sense to hide anything. Therefore, he explains that when the saint receives a revelation of a monster and the higher echelons confirm it, that monster is treated as a calamity and called a witch. And in the case of the girl in front of them, Vertil says she fits this profile, which leads him to believe she is the witch they are looking for. After hearing this entire explanation, Lonius finally understands the situation he is in. As for Atu, her patience is running out and she asks if their conversation is over. Upon hearing this, Vertil becomes irritated by her mocking comment and says that he and his men haven't given up on her yet. But as they advance toward her, Atu says they are too slow and powerless. However, they manage to cut off her tentacles, leaving Atu impressed. However, Atu uses her remaining tentacles to grab the paladins and says that she had underestimated them a bit. After all, they proved stronger than she expected. But now that she has them trapped in her tentacles, Atu asks how they will attack her in this position of extreme powerlessness. Furthermore, she uses the two captured paladins as human shields. Seeing this, Lonius begins to lose his temper, but Vertil tells him to remain calm. After all, there are only 2 more tentacles left for them to cut. Therefore, they only need to cut the last tentacles to finish the witch and ensure peace for their kingdom. Then, they set out to confront the witch. Seeing them continue to attack, Atu is left speechless, certain she would be immune to attack if she kept the humans as a shield. Unsure of what to do, Atu decides to attack Vertil more seriously. Vertil, already badly injured, urges Lonius to flee as quickly as possible to avoid becoming the witch's next victim. Lonius witnesses the scene of utter chaos and is left speechless as Vertil is thrown to the ground, and remembering that they cut off all his tentacles. Lonius wonders why the witch managed to attack him. At this, Atu says that she never confirmed that she only had 6 tentacles. Instead, she tricked them into believing her tentacles were finite, when in fact, she can replace them as many times as she wants, making her a true monster. Realizing she'd been toying with them from the start, Lonius widens his eyes in fear and drops his sword to the ground, unsure of how to proceed from there. So, Lonius orders Bargo and the others to flee in different directions, so that at least one of them will be able to return alive to the kingdom and tell what happened. As for him, Lonius confronts Atu head-on and is surprised to see that she, too, is capable of using the sacred art of the sword. Atu claims to be able to use it simply because she stole this skill from Vertil when she killed him. Furthermore, she also stole all the techniques he perfected, and as soon as she tests some of these techniques, she attests that he was a man worthy of being called a powerful fighter, even though he died from a simple mistake. And during the confrontation with Lonius, Atu reveals that she also managed to steal Vertil's memories, which allows her to learn personal information, such as the names of his wife and daughter, Marcia and Minna. Upon hearing this, Lonius notices that Atu grows stronger with each kill, making her a natural-born assassin. As for her, Atu recites some of Vertil's last memories. He was willing to protect all his companions until the end, which for Atu demonstrates that he was truly a man worthy of assuming the role of paladin. After telling the boy this, she asks him what he thinks of all this. Lonius then says that Vertil's will still lives within him, so he will continue to fight to ensure the team's survival. But suddenly, Lonius hears a mysterious sound echoing nearby. Atu informs him that she has already ordered the Dark Elves to go after the other paladins, and ordered them not to let a single man escape. Upon hearing this, Lonius begins to lose his temper again and launches an uncontrolled attack. As for her, Atu says that if he had listened to Vertil, their future would have been very different, as Lonius would have returned safely to his family and Vertil would still be alive. As for the forest and her, they would have lived a peaceful era without the paladin's interference in their home. Having explained what future he would have had if he hadn't acted in the past, Atu will now reveal what his future will be. Lonius and his entire family will be killed by her. However, she won't just kill them, but makes it clear that she will torture them until they begin to beg for death, and only then will she end their lives. And having done so, Atu says she will kill the people of every city the paladins passed on their way to the Dark Continent, and although she knows it doesn't make much sense, Atu still intends to kill these people who had nothing to do with what happened in the forest. And if anyone asks her why she's attacking, she'll say she's killing them because of Lonius's foolish actions. Hearing this, he tells her to stop, but Atu states that he will be killed for defying her. After all those who underestimate her deserve only death. At this, Lonius again begs for her mercy, asking him to stop doing that. At this, Atu says he is sure that Lonius was a good person, who believed in his god and loved both his family and the nation. However, Atu makes it clear that he hates people who think they are justice. Because of this, she will kill him. But first, Atu asks Lonius to watch his family's death from the VIP seat he will have in heaven. Later, after Lonius's death, Atu is approached by the Dark Elves, who confirm the deaths of the people she ordered them to kill. Atu praises their good work and says the king will also be happy to hear this. So she offers to go tell Takuto this news and tasks the Dark Elves with disposing of the corpses as well. But before she leaves, she asks if she will really commit all the evil deeds she had told Lonius about, and Atu says no. After all, she still considers herself a pacifist, and in this case, she was simply applying basic psychological pressure to her victim before killing him. During the conversation, Jin notices her strangeness and asks if something's wrong. Atu reveals that she needs to tell Takuto something important immediately. She approaches him and mentions the witch entity the paladins mentioned during the fight. Hearing this term, Takuto is confused, as he's never heard of it before. Atu then explains that they're definitely no longer in the normal game world, and while the game mechanics remain the same to some extent, Atu makes it clear that they can't count on this forever. After all, the world may change its way of working at some point. However, even though this is something to be concerned about, Atu says there are also positive aspects to the world being different from the game. In this case, she's talking about the modification that occurred with her special ability. Now she's not only able to steal her target's abilities, but also their memories to some extent. Hearing this, Takuto realizes she's right. After all, they learn of Qualia's precarious situation precisely because they used her new ability. Hearing this, Takuto says they can relax a little more and progress slowly, but Atu reminds him of the possibility of retaliation against them for killing the paladins. But upon hearing this, Takuto says that they don't even have any information about the kingdom of Mynoghra. Therefore, he guarantees that they won't be disturbed by Qualia. Therefore, the only thing that worries him is the so-called northern disturbance. After all, he believes that it was caused by a witch. In this, Atu confirms his deduction, as he eyes according to the memory she stole. However, she can't get any information beyond that. After all, not even Qualia seems to know much about this mysterious witch. The only thing they know is that the witch caused considerable damage to the cities of the northern province. And besides that, the other information Atu has obtained is that the kingdom of Qualia calls this entity Arakino, the sipping witch. As for Takuto, he thinks a little more and deduces that Arakino came into the world in the same way they did, considering that this witch has the power of an army, and that the kingdom of Qualia is their new enemy. Takuto realizes it's time for them to give birth to a new hero. Although he was planning to bring Ila into the world, Takuto reconsiders this idea and believes the best course of action is to bring the most powerful hero they can. Furthermore, he also considers allying with another nation. And since they are aligned with evil, Takuto realizes they will need to ally with a neutral kingdom, in this case, the Eastern Kingdom. During the conversation, Atu comments on her treatment of the paladins, saying she may have gone a bit too far with them. However, Takuto makes it clear that he would never be offended by anything she did, so he says it's okay. Hearing this, Atu becomes emotional and says he will support him forever and with all his strength. Upon seeing the final result of the castle, Takuto is excited about his kingdom's new construction. However, even though they've built a castle in the kingdom, one of the most important parts of the nation, Atu says they still have a mountain of problems to solve. However, she admits they've already made great strides in building the kingdom. But upon hearing this, Takuto says he plans to increase the castle's expansion time once they're off. Upon hearing this, Atu becomes even more enthusiastic about the idea and says they must build a massive palace, so enormous it will pierce the heavens and put down deep roots. And as for the vassals who serve them, they will be great heroes, determined to do what they want. In this case, their desire should be to serve the kingdom with all their might. As for Takuto, he begins to warm to this idea, but is soon interrupted by Atu, who remembers there's a major problem she's overlooked. Atu remembers they still don't have any servants serving them. At this, Takuto realizes she's right, and Atu begins to blame herself, saying she was a failure as a servant. But seeing her blame herself so much, Takuto tells her she's exaggerating. After all, he wasn't even bothered by it. However, Atu insists and asks him to make any request he wishes so she can make up for this colossal mistake she made. At this, Takuto limits himself to asking for a servant who is easy to talk to, as anything beyond that is a luxury. Beyond that, Takuto says he only wants a servant who can understand the Dark Elves at least a little. After all, he wants to try to be the friendliest king possible. Upon hearing this, Atu asks him to give her a little more time, as she is determined to find the perfect servant for the Mynoghra kingdom. But as soon as he notices her getting excited about this idea, Takuto begins to worry, remembering that nothing good comes of Atu getting too excited. After a while, she summons Molter and some Dark Elves and asks them to gather as many girls as they can in the kingdom, as Takuto intends to use them. But upon hearing Atu speak in such a suggestive way, Molter misunderstands. As for Atu, she says her plan is to leave the girls as Takuto's servants so he can practice his conversation and speak more freely with the dark elves. As for Molter, he breaks out in a cold sweat and asks why she's asking. At this, Atu makes matters worse, saying that her king likes young girls. After she explains the situation further to Molter, he finally understands the misunderstanding and realizes that the king simply wants to loosen up a bit when talking to the dark elves, and to do so, he needs to start talking to younger girls. As for Jay, he says that children often have more absurd ideas, but these ideas shouldn't be dismissed, as they can trigger revelations in adults. But beyond that, Atu reminds him that they're short of manpower, so they need to put even the youngest to serve the king. However, they'll only take on simple tasks, since they're children. Upon hearing this, Jay says they can also hire boys for the task, since there's no need for girls. However, Takuto says there's another reason he chooses only women. He wants to give them more opportunities. And although this desperate response doesn't go over well, Takuto manages to convince them. And Molter praises his inclusive policy, noting he's already thinking about the nation's future. And with everything discussed, Atu ends the conversation and asks them to bring their daughters quickly. The girls are handed over to him, but they begin to cry, making Takuto uncomfortable with all the noise. Seeing him so upset, Atu reminds him that the children are just being children, so he should be more patient with them. As for Molter, he says he's already brought all the children in the kingdom, so they'll have to adapt the children so they can see the king without crying. However, Jay remembers that they didn't bring the twins, but Molter says the two children wouldn't be fit to serve the king. But even knowing this, Atu says they should have taken the children to the king. At this, Jay steps forward, saying she brought the twins even without Molter's permission. Unlike a certain old man, he's always 2 steps ahead, always thinking of being the best possible servant to his king. Noticing the tension between the two, Atu asks them to stop the fight. So, Jay decides to expedite the process and takes the twins to the king. They introduce themselves as Korea and Maria, noticing a violent mark on one of the twins' faces. Atu asks how she got that wound. Korea says she got the mark due to an illness, and Takuto sympathizes with her. However, she makes it clear that she deserved it. After all, the illness was caused by a plague, and in her view, Korea believes that because she was a victim of the plague, she must have done something to deserve it. As for Maria, she says she committed something terrible, devouring her own mother due to the extreme hunger she felt when the Dark Elf's home was destroyed. Seeing that the king is more docile than his dark image suggests, Maria feels comfortable going to him and says she's willing to care for him, though she knows the task may be a bit difficult. And as she sees that she's willing to serve him, Takuto tells her she'll be a candidate for the leadership of the great nation of Mynoghra. Meanwhile, Atu notices the king having a minimally dignified conversation with someone, and this leaves her astonished. Continuing the conversation, Takuto asks if the girl isn't afraid of him, and Korea says her only duty is to accompany her older sister, so she can't be intimidated in his presence. If Maria decides to remain his servant, having decided this, Takuto says the two can begin taking care of the tasks he assigns. However, Molter intervenes in the conversation to make a small observation. He informs them that the two girls haven't cried once since losing their mother, which in turn can be considered a negative point, as it reveals a certain coldness in the sisters. At another point, Atu holds a meeting with Emla and the other elves and asks them to give their report. Emla is the first to stand up and says that now that they've finished building the palace, they'll have a break from the work. Therefore, Emla suggests they begin construction on a new facility, as they'll have more time to do so. Then, Atu reminds Takuto about the building they were supposed to build at the meeting they had a while ago, and suggests they move forward with it, in which case, they should begin construction on the clinic immediately. Upon hearing this, Takuto approves the idea, as a clinic not only has a very low production cost, but also ensures the health and safety of its citizens. And continuing with Emla, she says she is responsible for the kingdom's resources, and then says that the kingdom's internal collection of food and materials is going well. Nothing out of the ordinary, however. They feel need to use more mana to help manage this. Upon hearing this, Atu suggests they create more buildings and research that increase mana production, as it's a scarce and crucial resource. And since she is on the subject, she asks for the report on military magic. Molter stands up, claiming to be responsible for this area. And although he's the only one capable of using this resource at the moment, Molter assures them that with training, his subordinates will be able to do the same. As for Atu, she says the focus of their research will be on the 6 main elements of magical technology. After all, they won't be using too much mana resources on the kingdom's internal affairs, as this goes against the king's policies. After finishing the subject of military magic, she takes the liberty of continuing the conversation, saying she has something to report. In this case, she informs the king that 5 new long legs have been added to the kingdom's forces, and they are currently surveying the known territory surrounding the cursed lands. Upon hearing this, Atu asks to send the long legs to patrol the kingdom's border. After all, she alone is capable of protecting the entire Mynoghra nation, but Atu also says they're already studying the creation of a new hero. hero, so she won't have to protect the kingdom alone. Takuto then informs everyone that he intends to summon Ila, the insect queen. Upon hearing this, A2 asks Molter to report on the resources they'll need to summon this new hero. In this case, they'll only need mana to summon her. They already have the other necessary ingredients. At the end of the meeting, Takuto praises everyone, saying they are giving their all to the kingdom's tasks. At another point, the twins mess up and tear up one of the documents in front of the king. They apologize for the disastrous action they just committed, but Takuto smiles back at them and says everything is fine, being treated so kindly despite having made a mistake. Maria is left confused and asks the king if he is an evil person. To this, he says only his alignment is evil. Upon hearing this, Maria asks why he isn't killing the elven people instead of helping them. After all, that's what is expected of an evil being. As for Korea, she jumps in and asks why he's showing them so much mercy. This angers Maria, who wants him to unleash his true nature and be mean to them. Upon hearing this, Takuto explains that good people can only do equally good things, as it's against their nature to do evil. Now, evil people can do both good and bad things at the same time, which frees them. Thus, Takuto is a bad person, but he chose to be kind to the Dark Elves. That said, he notes that the sisters' mistakes so far, such as tearing up the document, were intentional. Since they can't accept the fact that they killed their mother, they are likely seeking death. They thought that angering Takuto would result in their deaths as punishment for these mistakes. Instead, Takuto urges the girls to stay strong and stay alive, so they can make their mother proud one day. At another point, A2 approaches Takuto to tell him about a city called Dragonton, a neutral, multiracial nation composed primarily of humans and beastmen. According to his research, the nation uses a parliamentary system run by shamans known as staff bearers. Upon hearing the details of the city, Takuto becomes excited about a possible alliance, as cities with diverse races tend to be more inclusive of outsiders. Continuing with the report, A2 informs that the city appears to have a dragon vein mine, which, in this case, is a mineral capable of producing mana. But beyond that, A2 says that the site is under constant attack by the mine's monsters, which in turn makes an alliance with them even easier, as Takuto can offer military aid to the city. Simply go work as a merchant Irito, get your hands on a little bit of mana. As the guy from Tropa D Elite would say, if you want to laugh, you have to make people laugh.